Well, hello, I'm Janet Morana, the Executive Director of Priests for Life. Welcome to our program. Well, of course, this is National Adoption Awareness Month. And as you know, I've been trying to highlight adoption on these programs here and there, just to show you that how important the concept of adoption is, and if more people would consider that option. And also, too, we have to change the whole stigma of adoption because unfortunately, when you survey women who've had abortions, so many of them say, well, I was afraid to consider adoption. So that's why I had the abortion. And then they later regret the abortion. We have to do more to show how adoption is, as they say, such a loving option. And the other thing we want to talk about today is, these circumstances of abortion being legal. And some people still cling to, well, but what about the cases of rape? Okay, what about rape? And for some reason, they say, well, they somehow think it's okay to permit an abortion if the woman's been raped. Well, I know from the Silent No More Awareness campaign, the women who went down that road deeply regretted that abortion. And they said, oh, it was another trauma. I was already traumatized from being raped, and now this happened. And yet, if you survey the women who were raped and then decided to have the baby anyway and either raise the child or made an adoption plan, it was healing for them. Well, joining me today is a man who's been wonderful witness to those children who were conceived in rape and also adoption. So he's got two purposes, two stories. So joining me is Ryan Bomberger from the Radiance Foundation. He's the co-founder of the Radiance Foundation. So Ryan, welcome to the program.
Janet, it is so nice to be here with you. Thank you so much.
That's great. And of course, like you heard me say, unfortunately, so many people still cling to the concept of, even when they're going to craft laws, well, we have to put an exception in. We have to, because what if the woman is raped? And they somehow think that offering a woman who's been raped an abortion is being nice and caring and helping her. And as I told you, you heard me say, I know from the testimonies of women who deeply regret it didn't help them. It didn't unrape them. It was another trauma. But you have a particular testimony, don't you? So why don't you share with us your testimony?
Absolutely. You know, I grew up in a tiny little family of 15. I have six brothers and six sisters. 10 of us were adopted. And many of our stories or the narratives that people use, particularly pro abortion activists, use all the time to justify abortion. And I'm definitely one of those cases. My birth mom, whom I've never met, and I pray one day I get to meet her and just thank her and hug her and just tell her how much her courageous decision has obviously changed the world in different ways. But my birth mom experienced the horror and the violence of rape. And even though she was a victim of rape, she did not make me a victim of abortion. So although I was conceived in rape, I was adopted in love. And so I grew up in this adoptive family where we're all kinds of different hues, different backgrounds, different stories. And our parents loved the mess out of us. And adoption, like this, my shirt says, adoption unleashed purpose in our lives. And so that's, my origin story. And it's because of my birth mom's courageous decision that I'm able to love and to be loved. And now today I'm happily married to the love of my life, Bethany Bomberger, who's the other co-founder of the Radiance Foundation. And we have four amazing kiddos, two of whom were also adopted.
Right. And see, that's a very important point I wanted to bring out here is that abortion has a generational effect. Your mother had the courage not to cave into, I'm sure, as we know, when a woman's been raped, you have all these people surrounding her, right? Social workers in hospitals, doctors in ERs, family members who are basically selling abortion to them because they think they're helping them. And as we know, it's not a help; it's a hindrance, actually. But imagine, had your mother not had the courage, then not only would you not be here, but then your children and your two natural children, and then the other two that you adopted wouldn't have this loving family. So people, when they make these political statements, Ryan, it makes me crazy. Must make you crazy too.
Yeah.
That what about this person? What about that person? They wouldn't be here if we caved into your political rhetoric, right?
Exactly. And the sad thing is people, as you mentioned, think that the natural follow-up or the remedy to the violence of rape is the violence of abortion. And the only person it actually benefits is the abortionist. I mean, abortion empowers the abortionist. It doesn't empower anybody else. And so I hear it all the time that people think, well, I can't imagine going through that circumstance. And what I found actually surprising in all the speeches I do across the country and sometimes abroad, I meet a lot of survivors from rape, and those who chose to parent, those who are post abortive, and of course those who chose adoption. And the common thread with these women has been, and these are incredibly strong women, like my birth mom. I consider them my birth mom. I call her birth mom strong. But the common thread was that the child was the only redemptive part of that violence. And in many cases, I hear story after story, the child rescued the woman out of that circumstance, out of that pain and out of that trauma. And so I hope that my life represents the tangible reality that God enables triumph to rise from tragedy all the time.
Yeah. Well, and it's like I said, the abortion doesn't unrape her,
Right.
and yet the birth of the child heals her. And that's a message we have to keep kind of going against our culture,
Right.
because sadly, some of the most pro-life people out there, representatives in Congress, they cave into putting rape and incest into their bills because they think we can't pass the bill unless we put it in. And what they have to see is the faces of people like you, Ryan, that, well, you're saying then I shouldn't have counted. I shouldn't be here then.
Right.
And I just think we have to keep, repeating that ad nauseum till we can convert them all 100%, Ryan. But let's talk about adoption just a little bit more. So you were adopted into, like, what was the big family? So where
Yeah.
in the adoption chain were you? And tell us a little bit about how was that? Like, how old were you when that you were adopted, and kind of what was that whole dynamic like?
Sure. Sure. So I was the first adopted. My parents had three biological children first. And actually, let me go back a little bit further so people can understand what even led to these adoptions. See, my mom grew up in a broken home. She had an alcoholic father. And so she was left in a children's home for a year while her parents were separating. And that's where my mom got the heart for adoption at the age of 5, by the way. So at the
Wow.
age of 5, because she noticed that there was another little girl there who had disabilities and no one came to visit that girl. At least my mom had her mom and her dad to visit her separately, but no one came to see that girl, and it broke my mom's heart. So that's where the heart for adoption began. And she met the most amazing man that I've ever known in my life, my dad, Henry Bomberger. So that's where that started. So they knew before they got married that they wanted to adopt. So I was adopted at 6 weeks of age out of the foster care system, as were many of my siblings. And so, my parents they had no mission other than they knew that they were called to adopt, and they just want to adopt those that the world would write off, that the hard to place, I guess, because I hate saying this word biracial because we're all one human race, but I'm mixed, black and white. Some of my siblings are also mixed. Some are black. One is white. As far as adopted, Native American, Vietnamese, able, disabled. I mean, just an incredible mixture. So I grew up in a family with kids with narratives that the world is always saying, well, no one should have to live this way. No one should ever have to face this kind of adversity. It makes me crazy because adversity actually makes us better human beings. And so growing up loved like crazy by, the pro-lifers who don't care about people after they're born. We are the people who care about people after they're born. But just growing up, it gives you such an incredible perspective on the value of life. We all have God-given purpose, whether we're planned, unplanned, able, disabled, and whatever beautiful hue of skin we have. We all have God-given purpose.
So now you were the first child you're saying that was adopted.
Yes.
How old were you when the next adopted child came in? And excuse me, How, like, when did you find out that you were adopted? Tell us a little bit about that whole dynamic.
Yes, well, I was the fourth into the family. So, they had three biologicals, fourth. And then it was almost every year there was a new, I don't know what you're going to say, new flavor added to the family. So, someone new added every single year. So, I would think that I would have been about just a little over a year old when the second sibling who was adopted came into the family. And so, literally, we all are about a year apart. So, all 13 kids under the same roof for many years, but each year it was an amazing thing to invite a new life into our home, and a new story and different circumstances, and I loved it. And it was, of course, raising children, whether they're biological or adopted children, there are always going to be challenges, which makes it interesting to me when I hear people say, well, you never know what you're going to get with an adopted child. There are circumstances, there's brokenness. I'm like, I don't know. Do people not get the memo that raising biological children is not an easy road either? I mean, that's just the nature of parenting. But I love the fact that my parents loved all of us, whether, biological or adopted. They loved us all the same. And, we went through joys, triumphs, failures, I mean, uncertainties, lots of faith, lots of self-sacrificial love. And my parents' love and dedication and their love for God changed the trajectory of our lives. It was a little crazy too, by the way, growing up in a family of 15 with 1.5 bathrooms at one point in our lives. But we managed because we had everything that we needed. We had parents who loved us. We had a God who loved us. And I just can't imagine growing up any other way.
So, how old were you when you were told or you found out? Because people they grapple with that. I hear this all the time. When should we tell the child they were adopted? How should we tell them? Now, in your case, there was a whole flood of adopted kids coming, one after the other after the
Right.
other. But at what point did they sit you down? Did it happen gradually? Little hints, reading
Right.
storybooks to you about adoption? Like, tell us, because people want to know. How do you deal with that question?
Right. I'm sorry. You asked that question earlier. I knew I was adopted pretty much from a really early age since my parents are white and I'm not. So I thought, obviously, I noticed a difference in the color of my skin and my parents. So my mom always describes my awareness very early, at 2 and 3 years of age. But my parents always talked about adoption. So it was never something, because you mentioned earlier about stigma. I can't believe in 2022, especially among Christians, that there's still some just unnecessary stigma about adoption. I mean, scripture is replete with adoption. I mean, first of all, there's no salvation without adoption. Ephesians 1:5. I mean, God intended us to become part of his family through adoption. That's Ephesians 1:5. That was the nature of what God established for us to become, part of the family of God. But it was something that was so normal and natural in conversations. I mean, obviously there's somebody different coming into the family, and we talk about those differences, and we love these differences. We love all these different hues of skin. And so it became a point of celebration in ways. My parents talked too about our birth parents and always honoring of our birth parents, but also talking about some of the difficult circumstances. I will tell you, it wasn't until I was 13 though that I fully understood my origin story. And it wasn't because they didn't try to explain it earlier. I just didn't understand apparently what rape actually was. And so it was in a kind of tense conversation when I was 13. I was a handful. Um, and that's when I found out. And it was devastating because my whole origin story was rewritten in a moment. But because I was loved so much by my parents, that confusion and that pain was channeled towards something really constructive. In fact, I did a persuasion speech in eighth grade shortly after finding out how I came to be. And it was the first time, this is public school, first time I was able to share my story and talk about abortion. And I watched the way that people responded, my teacher, my friends. And here I'm being all vulnerable and sharing my story of being conceived and raped, but adopted and loved. And I knew that I didn't realize to the extent, but I knew that God was going to use that story in so many ways.
Well, it's funny, Ryan. I just interviewed someone else, adoptive mother, the other day, and I asked her the same question, like, how did you tell your son? And he was 5 years old because she was reading him adoption books. And she said, do you know he went to kindergarten the next day? And when it came to sharing time, he thought everybody was adopted. So he got up and told his story. And then he said to the other kids, "Well, what about you?" And the kids all went, "I'm not adopted."
Right.
He came home and said to his mother, "What happened? I thought everybody got adopted." She had to sit him down and say, "No,
Oh my
that's
gosh,
not how it works."
that's adorable. And and the good thing is you had this as a child, you had this positive understanding of adoption. I get asked by a lot of parents, all the events that I speak at, and they ask me, well, when do I start talking about it? And I'm thinking as soon as you can. And it's an interesting balance though too, because you have biological children, adopted children, or if you have biological and adopted, they're equally as special, equally as valuable. And so there's this balance of not overemphasizing, but there are ways of naturally bringing it in. My mom, for instance, is just an avid reader. She's the reason why I love to write, why I'm a writer. The reason why I love just wordsmithing. And she would have us read all kinds of books. And they're great ways of being able to talk about, differences, a great way of talking about how God transforms lives. And a lot of the books that I read, even as a young child, those are ways of understanding more of about adoption, more about our family. And so they're just natural, positive ways of talking about it. We should never go into it thinking that it's some sort of negative thing. I still have some adults even talking about, well, I'm sorry, like maybe you don't want to talk about your adoption. Like, of course I do. Why wouldn't I want to talk about adoption? I was rescued. It's such a redemptive act of love. Of course I want to talk about it.
That's right. Okay, so now you gave that one speech in school, but when did you get to the point where you decided, I have to work in the pro life movement? I've got to start something. I got to dive in here and do something to stop abortion. At what point did that switch flip for you?
Well, that was probably more in grad school. I mean, in college, I dabbled a little bit in that, but I will tell you, I went to a Christian college that never even ever addressed the issue of abortion, but I did, with my story and some of the ministries that I was involved in, particularly as a mentor to young people like in Big Brothers, Big Sisters. But it really wasn't until grad school to where there were opportunities that opened up. In fact, I used to sing in this group, this band at the time, and we were opening up for, like a CC Winans and Toby Mac and the Katina Brothers and other groups like that. And so I had really large audiences that I would be able to share my story. And I realized that I needed to do that on a more regular basis. In fact, part of what we did through that group is we worked with this incredible adoptive family that adopted 7 kids all at the same time. They were siblings, and we had so many opportunities. I ended up going Oprah, Good Morning America. I mean, it was insane. But it wasn't until I got married to my best friend Bethany to where we wanted to figure out, how can we address all these culture shaping issues? How can we talk about adoption? How can we talk about abortion? And so it was us getting married and launching the Radiance Foundation back in 2009, where we fully explored how God could use us to speak into these issues and to talk about the beauty of adoption. And so that was, 2009. Here we are going into our 14th year with our nonprofit and celebrating the beauty of adoption.
So now tell us more about the Radiance Foundation. I know you're available as a pro life speaker, but tell us a little bit more about the work of the Radiance Foundation and your website and everything.
The Radiance Foundation is a life affirming organization, faith based organization that my wife and I began back in 2009 because we wanted to equip Christians, especially, but the public in general, to engage in culture conversations about culture shaping issues. Of course, life is the most fundamental one because without life, nothing else matters. And so we launched this to tackle these issues. And my wife comes from an educational background. She taught in both public and private schools for 13 years. I worked as a creative director in the ad agency world for the same amount of time. And we wanted to take the unconventional approach to things. We love the crafting messaging. And so, we do these campaigns, ad campaigns, billboard campaigns. That's how we began. We write these weekly op-eds. We are now publishing books, children's books, and we want to create tools to equip people to be unafraid to engage in these conversations. I mean, the world's out there screaming a lie, And as Christians, too often we're the ones who are silent, and yet we're the ones with the truth. And so we wanted to create an organization that would come alongside people to encourage them to distill these really complex issues down into simpler talking points. And so that's when we started the Radiance Foundation. And we're excited. In fact, one of our most, we did Pro Life Kids, which is a illustrated children's book. That's prolifekids.com. It's a great way to teach young kids an age appropriate pro life worldview. We shouldn't be afraid. We shouldn't fear talking about what it means to value every human life. And so, one of the things that we're going to be focusing on, particularly in this coming year, is publishing more children's books to break through a lot of the cultural noise and equip these children to have a biblical worldview on human dignity and human value.
And of course, I want everyone to know that it's the radiancefoundation.org is your website. I know you have, besides the children's books, you do have great T-shirts. I love your postcard messaging and your phrases and designs. Just tell us about some of those phrases. I mean, the phrases are so clever that you and your wife have come up with. Tell us about some of those phrases.
We do love creating, whether they're memes or infographics, we love creating these things that actually just kind of, well, God is a revelational God, right? And so as a designer, our part of my worship to God is creating this content. And I consider them divine downloads anyway. But some of the best things in life are unplanned. They're one of the things we say. Or when we talk about, in our culture about loving everybody, everyone's like, well, you don't love somebody if you don't accept everything of who they are. Well, that's not true. So one of our sayings is loving every human being isn't the same as loving every human doing. There are so many ways that we talk about these things. For instance, I'm the 1% that is used 100% of the time to justify abortion. And when I say that, I mean, especially in college campuses, they understand, yeah, I'm the story that's always exploited to justify abortion. So we try to take these big things and say, all right, here's a line. Now think about, this issue now in this context. And so we create these sidewalk counseling cards. We have these stickers and all kinds of memes. In fact, actually the easiest way to get to our website is radiance.life. It's a little shorter, radiance.life. And we love creating this content. We want to continue to create content that's fearless, that's factual, and that's freeing. But we really want to kind of move people, because sometimes you can hear something 100 times, 1,000 times or whatever, but someone says it a little differently. And that's what we want. Our prayer is that God uses us to just give people this revelational moment, like, wow, I never thought of it that way before.
Tell us a little bit more about the messaging then, like you just said, for children, these children books ideas, because right now, I don't know about you, but I am so, I have grandchildren now, believe it or not. And it infuriates me that all this stuff they're shoving down children in schools' throats with
Right.
uh, what's your pronoun, the transgender stuff, and then letting these young children change sexes and all this stuff. The books that they're allowing in public school libraries are just pornographic to the point.
Mm-hmm.
So how are your books gonna, like? Because I'm sure parents hear this are gonna go, "What? Where are your books? Ryan, where can we get them? What can we do?" Because I think everybody there is a definite sentiment, I think, in our country right now, where people have said, and Christians are beginning to stand up and get some courage and say, enough is enough.
Mm-hmm.
But tell us about like your books, like, because I think they're going to want to get them to help save the situation in their hometown.
Exactly. And in fact, I live in Loudoun County, Virginia. This is like ground zero for school boards going wild. We're dealing with all these crazy policies, like policy 8040, where they, can take your child and have them, change their gender at school, but they can't tell the parents. I mean, it's so insane. They have these pornographic books that celebrate pedophilia. I mean, it is crazy. And so, of course, I mean, the left, the political left, is constantly targeting young children all the time. And what frustrates me to no end is that so many times conservative and or Christian parents, sometimes they're not one and the same, but they're reluctant to engage on these issues. Like, why are you waiting? The world's out there. addressing this nonsense with pre-K children, and we're like, oh, I'm going to wait until they're older. We cannot wait. We have to teach our children before a broken world reaches them. And so, our pro-life kids book is our first endeavor in a children's book. And this is my wife's passion, children's lit. She was a teacher in both elementary, middle school, public and private school. And so her heart is children's literature, children's storybooks. We also have a new one coming out, Janet, that actually deals with gender identity. The book is called She is She. And it is, in fact, we describe it this way. It's a book all about undeniable, biological, beautiful her. I can't even believe that we're even having conversations about what a woman is, or not even using the word woman. I mean, calling women pregnant people and birthing people and menstruating people. I mean, what is going on? So we cut through this nonsense. Our new book is coming out. We're hoping to actually have it out before Christmas. But it's She is She, and they can go to sheisshe.com or just go back to our main website, radiance.life. But we've got to counter this nonsense, this pollution, and this what I consider child abuse. The whole transgenderism movement is child abuse. And I thank God here in Loudoun County that informed and involved parents have said enough is enough, and we're fighting back.
Well, I'll tell you, Ryan, I have 3 granddaughters, so I want 3 copies of She is She ASAP.
You got it. You got it.
And it does create confusion because even my grandson came home from school the other day, and he says to my daughter, Mom, that girl in my class, I forget her name even. And my daughter said, yeah. Well, now she wants to be called, and he named the boy's name. And so I was there in the room too. I said, well, Lucas, how does that make you feel? And he said, well, she's, he's still she. And when I'm in school, if I have to say that other name, I'll say it. But then when I'm not there, I'll just call her just what she is. She's a girl. She's not a boy. So he got it, but it was like, oh my goodness. So you can see this is creating a lot of confusion, in children. So that's fabulous that you and your lovely wife are really taking this head on. So Ryan, I want to thank you for being with me today. And brothers and sisters, it's radiance.life. Go there and get these life affirming messages and books and stickers and t-shirts. So thank you, Ryan, for your witness. God bless you.
God bless, Janet.
Well, brothers and sisters, I hope you found this program interesting and informative. And remember, adoption is the loving option, and that every abortion affects somebody. It affects the baby, always the mother, the father. And so therefore, brothers and sisters, there are some abortions only you will be able to stop, and some lives only you will be able to save. Join us again next time. Thank you, and God bless.